Today we discuss the options we have for anticoagulation with their CRT machine. So we routinely have used systemic heparin to anticoagulate the filter and hope the filter lasts longer. So we would give the patient systemic heparin. We would check the patient's PTT to evaluate that the filter is properly anticoagulated. We have other options. We can do regional heparin or regional citrate. Regional being, this is our region, right? This is our region, here to here. The filter, that's our region. That's all we're really trying to anticoagulate. So for heparin, it would just go in through the red access port right before the filter, because it doesn't need to mix with the blood for it to be effective for very long. So it'll coat this filter and give you some protection. That itself isn't always enough either. Oh, by the way, if we're using regional heparin, we're still checking the patient's PTT, looking for a normal range. So it would not affect the patient. Most of it is dialyzed down. If someone has contraindication to heparin, we have to make adjustments. Then we have another option. We have citrate as a regional anticoagulant. The citrate it's got a couple of contraindications. If someone has an elevated liver enzymes with transaminase greater than 1,000, if someone has cardiogenic shock, there's a question about when your lactate is 4, but it's contraindicated if you're in cardiogenic shock with a lactate of 8. So those would be contraindicated. And if you don't have a central line, because for the calcium chloride, you can't have the citrate. So citrate is given to bind with free calcium. So the free calcium is part of the clotting cascade, and if you don't have free calcium, you can't make a clot. So what we do is we give it into the circuit to mix with the blood, preventing clots in the filter. And then on the other end, we replace the patient's calcium because we depleted so much in the circuit. So anyways, back to the beginning. You have some labs that you need to check before. So you'd have to know what your heart function is, your lactase, your ABG, your CBC, BNP, MAG, liver enzymes, and your ionized calcium. All those have to be within 6 hours before you can start the process. What you would do is you would start your CRT machine, and when the CRT machine is going, then we're going to start our calcium chloride drip. Calcium chloride has to go 15 minutes before the initiation of citrate, because we want to make sure the patient has a safe amount of calcium in their body. So calcium chloride is ordered based on millimoles, factored by the physician and pharmacy. They'll decide how many millimoles they'll need, but the starting range is 55 to 88 milliliters an hour. You'll have a titration order. So if it's low, you'll be able to give boluses of calcium chloride, and if your calcium chloride is high, we're going to decrease the drip. Okay, so those labs, like all of our labs, are going to be 4 to 6 hours, and 2 hours after you make a change. So if you make a change, your 6 hours now goes to 2 hours, because we want to make sure that we've made a proper adjustment. So the calcium chloride is going at 55 to 88 milliliters an hour for 15 minutes. Then we need to start looking at our citrate. Okay, so we got our citrate. We have our citrate drip, and the citrate comes. It attaches to our CRT line. So if you remember, I've asked people to keep the little blue caps that come with the CRT. So these are anti-reflux valves. So normally the CRT, if you hook directly to the access port of the central line, if you just hook directly to it, you could go about 3 to 4 cc's an hour, or 5 cc's an hour, but you'd always have blood pushing back up into the line. You'd always have back into the IV line. But if we use the anti-reflux valve and put that in, this will be able to go at our normal rate. Our starting rate is for citrate is 125 an hour, and that will be no problem if you've got the anti-reflux valve. You'll see that I've got this put in the way down here. It's at the first access point on the access port, first access port, because we want this to mix as long as we can down the dialysis catheter until it gets to the filter, because that way the mixing will bind with the free calcium, and you will not be able to form a clot, likely to form a clot inside the filter, which is the goal. We know that our normal calcium, or ionized calcium in this filter should be 1 to 1.6. So if our ionized calcium is 1 to 1.6, the clotting is really unlikely. But how do we know? Well, we're going to check at the blue port. We're going to check here at the blue port. We're going to check an ionized calcium. Your order for that is going to be post-filter ionized calcium. And so if it's below 1, we're going to decrease our citrate by 10. If it's above 1.6, we're going to increase our citrate to make sure that we're 1 to 1.6 within the filter so we don't clot. Now you have a calcium of 1.5. You had an ionized calcium of 1.5, getting ready to go back to the patient. So if you know anything about muscles and heart and function, and you know they are all reliant on that calcium, magnesium, and stuff. So calcium levels have to be replaced because we've depleted it in the circuit. So this is going back to the patient at 1.5. Fortunately, we already have our calcium chloride drip going at 55 to 88. So we should be checking the patient every 6 hours because we want to make sure that we've got this in range and that we don't deplete the patient to where it's unsafe. So we have to check that every 6 hours, the patient's ionized calcium. If it comes back low, there'll be orders to replace it automatically. If it comes back high, there'll be orders to decrease the drip. Right? That'll balance that out. So keep checking your post filter, your post filter ionized calcium, the patient's ionized calcium, mag, electrolytes, ABGs, because part of what the byproduct of calcium chloride or the citrate is bicarb. So we would anticipate maybe even an alkalosis, which usually isn't a problem because we're acidotic to start off with. But if we are if we start seeing a change and the patient becomes acidotic, metabolic acidosis, then we're really probably heading into some liver failure, and this isn't going to be the right medication for you. Okay? So, good luck.